What on earth is this? I'm wearing a Japanese sword while also wearing a European gambeson? Cultures colliding! Cultural appropriation! Our heads are gonna explode!
Shadowverse.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and in this episode of Pop Culture Weapons Analyzed, I want to look at an iconic weapon in anime. Now, I have a soft spot in my heart for anime because I used to be a full-on weeb. I loved it massively when I was much younger, admittedly. Don't watch nearly as much nowadays, of course, and it has to be particularly good to catch my interest. Yet there is one anime that I can still watch and enjoy, even with many of the kind of humorous mistakes and errors and all these other things, but that is the classic anime Rurouni Kenshin, or also known as Samurai X. It's actually a really heartwarming redemption story, and in all honesty, the movies, Samurai X movies, there's movies before the series called Samurai X. The TV series is Rurouni Kenshin with kind of subtitle Samurai X, Rurouni Kenshin Samurai X. And then there's a movie afterwards, Samurai X as well, but there's like Trust, Betrayal, and I forget the last one because it's been a while. Great animation, and I mean, check out this. Now, of course, it's fantasy sword fighting, okay? And this is one of the interesting things that I think actually has given rise to some of the mythology around the katana. And I know I'm getting distracted because this episode is going to be an in-depth review of Kenshin's reverse-bladed sword, katana, the sakabato, which is, I think, just Japanese for reverse-bladed sword. But it's essentially a katana with a blade on the back edge. So we'll look at that. But the thing is, what I find interesting. Oh, sorry, I have to do the proper Japanese way of sheathing the katana. I was very poorly done. I know. Anyway, one of the things that I find interesting with Japanese pop culture stuff like that is that, of course, with any fantasy adventure kind of story, you want the swordsmen to be better than ever and the swords to do incredible superhuman things. But in the context of the show, the swords aren't magic or enchanted. When you look at the fantasy interpretations of European fantasy, when a sword does something supernatural, it's because it's naturally magical or something is made out of a magical material. But with the katana, the context of the shows is that these are just normal swords, okay? And then they're doing incredible things like chopping stone pillars in half, metal in half, and stuff like that. And so the people who get overly invested in these shows, I actually feel sometimes, especially when you're young, okay? When you're young, you can kind of understand this misunderstanding is that swords, these katanas, they can just chop through anything, when no, in reality, it's a sword, okay? A sharpened bit of metal. The katana has strengths in cutting particularly, but it's not the best one and it's not the only one that is so good at cutting. Look at the falchion, look at the tolwa, look at the mesa, okay? Really crazy good cutters, and they fall in the same kind of category as the katana because the katana is particularly good at cutting. It's their strengths and weaknesses. What are some of the weaknesses with the katana? Well, it doesn't have nearly as much reach as other swords. This is a one-handed arming sword, European, and look at the blade lengths, okay? They're the same blade lengths, okay, but the katana is a two-handed weapon. This is one-handed, and if you want to compare two-handed long swords, have a look at the blade distance, the old blade length right there, okay? So, and one of the other weaknesses, less hand protection with the katana. So I'm not saying it isn't a great sword or a beautiful sword, it is. And it has particular strengths in cutting, but it's not the best sword in the world. It has weaknesses as well, just like every other sword. Like this sword, nowhere near as good as cutting as this one, but you can get heftier long swords that are built for cutting. This is like a thrusting beast, okay? Still effective at cutting, or effective enough, and this is coming from several reviews I've looked up. But anyway, those are just some brief, almost necessary caveats I need to mention whenever the katana is brought up in any context, because there is so much overpraise for the katana and over hate for it as well. I've got an entire series on the katana, 5-part series going in depth, how they're made and everything like that. So if you want my in-depth views on it, check out those videos. Even ones where I've compared the katana to the longsword as well. There's a katana versus longsword. Do you see my head glowing right here? This is what happens when the sun comes out after you adjust the brightness levels on your camera. It'll change halfway through. Get ready for a jarring jump cut. So now let's go into this anime kind of adaptation on the katana. Rurouni Kenshin's, or Kenshin Himura's, reverse-bladed sword. So in the context of the series, Kenshin was He was the most deadly, insane sword fighter in the world because he had learned one of the greatest sword fighting techniques of all time, the Hiten Mitsurugi. Now, of course, this is fantasy, pop culture, stuff like that, because like in the context with the show, the Hiten Mitsurugi has certain moves in, like, part of it is that there's a lot of attacking, Kenshin attacks while drawing it, Iejatsu, Aido, and it's also insanely fast. It's like one of the fastest sword fighting styles of all time. That's fantasy, okay? That speed really comes down to the type of weapon you're using, and the katana is not the fastest weapon in the world, by the way. It's actually on the heavy end of the spectrum for its size, and so it's the type of weapon and the individual using it that will give you speed. And then there are like super insane, legendary maneuvers that the Hiten Mitsurugi has a part of it, which makes it almost the unbeatable sword fighting technique. There's the Ryokuzen, and I forget which one that was specifically. It's either the one where he attacks so fast that he attacks from every single angle, but then there's the ultimate super, almost light speed drawing attack called the Amakaka no Ryu no Hiremeki. I really enjoyed the show. I can even remember these Japanese. I'm probably pronouncing them horribly, but anyway. So, greatest swordsman in all the world, and during the Meiji Revolution, no, because it was the, seeing this again, history, anime, it's been a long time. Meiji Revolution. So Rurouni Kenshin is based in a historical period in Japan, and he was fighting to kind of reinstate the Japanese emperor, overthrow the shogunate. I know there's going to be so many people correcting me in the comments. Anyway, he slaughtered thousands of people, like almost millions, and he was, in the context of the show, one of the greater, reasons why the revolution was successful, because Batosai, the manslayer, was just this insane killer. Afterwards, he takes a vow to never kill again, okay? But he has this incredible sword skill, like he's the greatest swordsman who's ever lived. And so, as kind of, it's interesting, this is kind of weird, but I get it, is that he is given a sword because he is struggling, and you find this out in the anime. He's given a sword that has a blade on the reverse edge. Now, this is weird because again, it's been a while, but I do, remember some people saying that you can't kill with this sword. Well, obviously you can. You just turn the blade forward. And he uses the blade on his reverse blade sword in cutting things all the time. Not people, but he cuts like blades, pillars of stone and stuff with the reverse edge. And so I want to talk about how effective having a sword with an inverse curve like this, how effective it would be. Because guess what? They actually existed. Blades, swords, like Kenshin Himura's, Batosai the Manslayer, Samurai X's reverse-bladed sakabato, anyway, actually existed. Not in katanas, and they were in different historical periods, so I'll talk about that. But it's implied that because it has a blade on the back edge, you can't kill anyone, because the best moves that the Hiten Mitsurugi, employs requires a curved blade like this, particularly because so much of, so much of the attacks of the Hiten Mitsurugi is, drawing attacks and stuff. And yes, okay, I'm not trying. If you're wondering what I'm talking about, it's those people who's like, Shad, you can't do it, you've never done it before, that was a crappy sword. I wasn't even trying it, of course I'm crap, because it's not a style that I've trained in. Okay, so trying to draw the sword and attack in one motion with the blade being on the reverse edge, and so this is me holding, it's doable, actually. How doable is that? I need to double check that because that was actually far easier than I was expecting. So if I was trying, curve, see the curve? I'm grabbing it on the reverse edge. If regularly, you'd have to do it like that. Okay, so now, drawing and attacking in one motion. This actually wasn't that hard. Okay. Ooh, jarring jump cut. That has an effect on you. So, interestingly, a lot of the big finisher moves of the Hiten Mitsurugi is based around the drawing technique, and I think you'd be able to do that with the, blade on the reverse edge just as well, and strike with the blade, and then do big cuts. And so the idea that, you can't kill anyone with a sword where the blade is on the back edge doesn't really work. There's a bit of a flaw in logic with that. But having said that, I actually feel the blade being on the back edge is there, so almost like it's a test of Kenshin's true penitence, okay? Is he really sorry for what he did? Because there are many situations where, in all honesty, the people he's fighting deserve to be killed, okay? They need to be taken out. It's kind of the whole Batman-Joker thing, all right? If Batman just killed the Joker, but he first defeated the Joker, he would have saved heaps of lives later on. Yet, the killing that Kenshin has done has emotionally scarred him so deeply that it seems like it would have a greater psychological impact. If he ever killed again, he feels he would revert back into the manslayer and become a unstoppable slaughter machine again, and he doesn't want that to happen. He feels that he killed unjustly during the war. Now, in a war, I feel things are different, but from the character's perspective, he thinks they're murders, okay? And by reverting back to that former self, he'll just kill everyone. And so even killing the bad guys is too much. He won't kill a single soul because he feels that will happen to him. And so it seems like as a true test of his sincerity, he has a sword which has the ability to kill still, okay? Well, in actual fact, it has the ability to kill even when he strikes people on the blunt edge, but we'll just go with it. It's a TV show. It has the ability to kill with a blade, and all he has to do is reverse it. And there are times where he becomes so close, where he gets so angry with the murder and bloodshed he's seeing that he wants to punish these people, and he kind of does the big, he's holding it, oh no, he's holding it by the blade, he's gonna kill. But you know, it's a good show for a reason, okay? So that temptation is always present, and I think that's why they have the blade on the back edge. Because really, if he just didn't want to kill anyone, he'd just have a blunt sword with no edge on it at all. You can still kill people, but it'll be far more difficult to do so. So then, how effective would his sword be, the sakabato, when he throws it around the wrong way? Well, it's funny, wrong way, right way, with the blade on the back edge. Well, it's funny, when I say blade on the back edge, I actually don't really consider it being on the back edge, because there are swords that have inverse curves. So really, it's just an inverse curved katana, essentially. But for a katana, they don't have inverse curves, so that's why it's a reverse one. I get that, okay? But what is this sword that has an inverse curve? Well, look at the Dushian Falx. And I'm probably butchering the pronunciation as always, but okay, so a Falx, reverse bladed sword. Even I said it. Inverse bladed sword. And it really does look like this is an adaptation of a farming implement, like a sickle, and then just made as a proper weapon, as like, okay, we can use this weapon, let's make it more weapon-like, because usually sickles have a very, very strong curve. Well, with the Dacian Falx, I think it's Dacian. With the Dacian Falx, the curves aren't nearly as pronounced, but there's variants. There's ones with wider curves, and there's ones with as shallow curves as what we kind of see right here. And they are very effective swords. But what's kind of interesting about this idea is that having a normal curve, okay, on a sword is far more common than an inverse curve. They existed, but why is one so significantly more prominent than the other? Well, of course, it comes down to the exact mechanics of what's happening in the cut with the type of curve that's on the blade. And it's not to say that the inverse curve is universally worse. There are strengths and weaknesses. I generally feel there's probably more strengths with a regular curve, but with the curve, the standard curve you see on a katana, I've mentioned this many times before, this actually won't increase cutting ratio, or if it does, and I've done tests with this, right? It is so minute that it's not even worth mentioning. What the curve does assist with is with edge alignment, okay? And we can see this with the simple test, okay? If I rest the katana here and let it, see, it does it. So just let it rest. It naturally rolls into correct edge alignment because of the way that the blade structure is. So see, yeah, flat, just let it roll, and look at that, correct edge alignment. And so it's well known that the katana has a very interesting property that many sword enthusiasts and experts have attributed to that, and they say it is forgiving in the cut. What does that mean? Well, it means when you do a cut with a katana and your edge alignment is off. What is edge alignment? It means that the blade, okay, the actual edge, is facing the same angle as the motion of the cut itself, okay? So if I'm cutting and my edge alignment is off and I hit something, the blade can just kind of roll onto the flat and it won't do a thing. But the katana is forgiving with bad edge alignment. So if you cut something or strike something and the edge alignment is off, because the blade is thicker, therefore stiffer, there's less flex. If you have a thinner blade and it has more flex, and you hit with bad edge alignment, there's a chance the blade will flex and even bounce off the target. That's not good. You don't want that. The way you fix that is with technique, better edge alignment. But if you do that with a katana, there's a better chance that it will still bite in because it's got more resistance in the flex, and because it has this kind of self-correcting mechanism because of this slight curve, which again corrects bad sword form. This is why people who have nearly no experience, even just no experience with swords, can pick up a katana and chop a tatami mat in two, because the katana is actually easy to cut with than other swords. This is why it is a good cutter. Does that mean it will cut as deep as other swords, even with swords that aren't as forgiving in the cut? No, because if you have good technique, okay, you can cut easily as deep and effectively as what a katana can. The katana is just more forgiving for bad form and technique. And so that is actually a significant advantage that you get out of even having a very slight curve. Do you get that with an inverse curve? No, in actual fact, the reverse seems to be opposite. Remember how when I put it on there, when I just rest here, it naturally rolls into correct edge alignment? Well, when you do this, it wants to naturally roll out of correct edge alignment, okay? And so that is a weakness with an inverse curve. When you strike, it can naturally, like when you strike something, it can naturally roll and then roll onto the flat, because by the nature of the geometry of the weapon, it wants to roll out of correct edge alignment. Where you fix that is with a technique, but that is a weakness. But there are advantages with an inverse curve that might, balance it in the other direction to make someone decide, I do want a reverse kind of inverse curve weapon blade, and that is the additional leverage you get in actual cutting, okay? The way we can kind of deconstruct the mechanics of what's happening here is by accentuating the actual mechanics itself. And so with an axe, okay, what I'm comparing here is the point of leverage that you have at the end of it compared to where you're holding it. Now, with a reverse curve, the point where it's ending is kind of where it ends on an axe. It's here. So the curve is curving down, and so it's there, all right? Now, what you'll notice, if you grab an axe and just put the tip on anything like that and apply pressure, you'll find that just the way that with you holding it, you're able to get more pressure and more force on it. But if you reverse this, and so this is where the end point of the sword would be with a regular curve, and you put the tip on something and try and apply force and pressure, you'll notice that you kind of more push yourself down, and it's harder to get the pressure and push it in as much as when you are holding it like this. And so what we're seeing here is the position, okay, of the force compared to your leverage point. And so with a regular curve, the leverage point is underneath where you're applying the pressure, and so the natural indication is to get pushed down as a result, which you lose some of the energy and force with the leverage point just getting knocked down. But if you suddenly reverse it, okay, suddenly the point of leverage is situated in a more direct line behind the tip, the connecting point, and so you can exert more pressure. And this applies as well when you go to cut. You get that additional leverage to apply more force. So there's an advantage there. You can actually produce some more force with an inverse curve, but there are problems. The main one being is that it wants to roll out of correct edge alignment. But there's another advantage with the curve, and it doesn't exist with one that's so shallow as this, and that is in cutting, okay, the actual cutting slicing ratio. With a curve as shallow as this is just like barely off straight, okay? You don't get an increase in cutting ratio. But if you had a more pronounced curve, which exists on other swords, like the tolwa, which falls within the kind of classic scimitar family, well, that means when you actually cut something, that more of the edge comes in contact with the target that you're cutting, and it slices. It actually cuts more. It's a slicing cut or a draw cut, which is more effective than just a standard flat static hack. Now, I've actually compared this, okay? I've made 3D models looking at the cutting ratio of the standard curve of the standard katana, and the cutting ratio, the increase is basically nothing, okay? It doesn't increase cutting effectiveness, but it has other advantages with the curve, just not cutting ratio, which some people, many people in fact, attribute it to when they try and extol the virtues of the katana. The next advantage with having an inverse curve is where the part of the blade hits first, which part hits first, and usually it will be the tip, especially with ones that have even a slightly more pronounced curve, and especially ones that have a more pronounced curve, a heavily one. When you strike with something, the tip is the thing that will usually hit first, and that has greater penetrative power, all right? That'll really dig in. And now the sun has gone away and it's too dark. Well, oh well, we'll just have to fix it in post or something. But yet there is another disadvantage with this, and it's the fact that the tip, when you're trying to, once that you connect with the target and you strike and you want to follow through, because of the inverse curve, there's higher chance that your blade can get stuck in whatever you're cutting, especially as you come in contact with bone or something solid, okay? You can actually get stuck and you have trouble withdrawing your blade, and if your blade gets locked away, that's not good, okay? That's almost instant death. Like, if you tried to cut a gambit and you didn't get through it and then you got caught on the layers and you have to kind of pull it back. It's not to say it would get jammed in there, but it just means that the motion of the cut can be stalled and you have to reverse to pull it out, and you can't do a full sweeping through. With a regular curve that you see here, that will basically never happen because you can just slice it, draw it through the target. So when you hit, you just slice it and draw it through, and it'll come all the way. And that's kind of one of the main techniques in which the katana is used, okay? Big draw cut slicing all the way through, okay? Now, the thing is, you can do these slicing using draw cuts with a straight blade because the katana barely has a curve, where you strike and just draw it through, okay? And because there's no inverse curve, the tip isn't going to get stuck. So the disadvantage that exists with an inverse curve does not exist with a katana that has a slight curve, and even swords that have no curve at all, just straight. And so in my opinion, I feel there's more detrimental elements with a inverse curved sword like the Dacian Falx compared to a regular curved one. But there's some advantages, so it's not to say they're completely ineffective. They're pretty deadly, vicious weapons, and Kenshin's reverse bladed sword falls into that regard as well. It would cut really effectively. And because Kenshin is a master, the problem with it falling out of edge alignment wouldn't be an issue. He should be so perfectly good with edge alignment that in actual fact, he probably wouldn't even need the katana's curve to assist with it. He would actually get more advantages out of a straight bladed katana than a curved one. And yes, I know the curve is on the katana because of the quenching process, but that doesn't mean that's a quality that is, unavoidable with a katana. The way you make a straight katana, with differential hardening, is actually forge the blade with an inverse curve, and then when you quench it, because when you quench it, there is more clay on the back than on the front, so that means the back end cools down slower, and so the blade will actually curve forward a bit, and then it gets bent back, pulled back into this curve in the quench, because there's more mass on the back of the blade, and it's cooling down slower, and so that's where the natural curve comes from in the quench. And like I was saying, you can inverse curve the starting point, so when it naturally pulls back in the quench, it'll pull back into a straight position. So you can have straight katanas that are differentially hardened. The idea that it's impossible is wrong. So yes, Kenshin Himura sakabato is an effective weapon, absolutely, okay? And it's a fun, enjoyable anime as well. These have been my thoughts, analysis, and breakdown. Hope you've enjoyed, and of course I hope to see you again. So until then, farewell.